Look, I know how many of you are going to see this. It's going to sicken you, okay? And I know what the reaction was. I know what the reaction was by The Guardian. I know what the reaction was by TikTok. And I'll speak to that, okay? But let's just unpack what's going on here, okay? The part of the letter that's resonating is the pronouncement that America's presence in places in the world that Osama bin Laden believed should be solely the domain of Islamic states, including the Middle East, specifically Israel and Palestine, that presence, that interference was a form of imperialism, of oppression, and that any suffering in that part of the world is the fault of America and its allies, like Israel. Muslims, he believed, therefore, had a holy commitment to jihad, a concept within Islam, but he twisted it to mean nothing but violence against innocent people, especially from America. This is deeply disturbing to many. I get it. But I can also see how the ideas, especially out of context and with the benefit of perspective of who and what causes trouble for people in that part of the world, can seem to validate pro-Palestinian sentiments, a righteous call to fight back against the oppressor on the part of the oppressed. The reason that this doesn't scare me and that I don't share the concerns about this letter being out there is because I know that the message and the messenger are in fact anything but a reflection of righteous indignation or justice, and actually give us a great opportunity to see what wanting better for Palestine, and dare I say Israel, should really mean. Many romanticizing this letter were too young or not born at all when 9/11 happened. Osama bin Laden may just be a name to them. Now others may have lived it, as I did, and lost loved ones, and agonized, and bled, and cried. Now, probably not, but maybe, and if so, they should remember what matters. Bin Laden never helped the cause of freedom because he did not want to free anyone in terms of what is being called for in Palestine. He did not want democracy or self-determination or rights. He wanted to create a twisted, perverse notion of an Islamic state where the Muslim faith was perverted into extreme restrictions, where all non-extremist Muslims are infidels who should be killed, tortured, raped, and not necessarily in that order. October 7, he would have loved it. That was exactly what he was about. Women are chattel, to be covered and kept quiet. Infidels can be mutilated. Their children can be destroyed. The prophet, blessed be his holy name, forbid you'd be a member of LGBTQ. They were to be slaughtered like livestock. He had no interest in peace or any rational notion of justice. He was irreconcilably tied to the idea that because he didn't like the state of affairs, he was justified in killing everyone he disagreed with and controlling the areas himself through al-Qaeda, which he started, with a savage notion of society. This is not an opinion. He said it. His followers said it. It was echoed to me. Many countries, all over the world, many times, many years. And as for the man himself, he could not be a better example of the fraud of this kind of extremism. This guy was not a true believer. He was a man who condemned Western excess, but he grew up in it. His father was a billionaire in Saudi Arabia. Ironically, one of the few places he never targeted, despite the fact that they live in complete opposition to his aim of alienating the West. He did not know oppression until he created it. He left studying business and a life of luxury to become a dilettante with a death wish. He hated America, but first he worked for it as a shill, fighting the Russians in Afghanistan, When he was done there, he grew dissatisfied with the lack of lasting commitment to his efforts by America. So he went deeper and darker into his disillusion, that if you did not believe in his same twisted form of religion, Allah wanted you dead. He told Muslims to kill themselves and others. In December of 1988, 4 days before Christmas, he plotted and blew up a Boeing 747 Pan Am jet, London to New York City. 259 dead. 180 Americans going home for the holidays. The only thing worse than accepting his ideas as an invitation to righteous pursuit, in my opinion, is the decision of The Guardian and TikTok to censor the letter. It's been taken down from The Guardian. TikTok issued a statement. Content promoting this letter clearly violates our rules on supporting any form of terrorism. We are proactively and aggressively removing this content and investigating how it got onto our platform. The number of videos on TikTok is small, and reports of it trending on our platform are inaccurate. This is not unique to TikTok and has appeared across multiple platforms and the media. You know what all this is? Ooh, not us. Don't cancel us. They don't care about the ideas. When will we learn? All you do when you censor, especially if you're doing it just to cave to a media mob that's going to forget about this in 5 seconds, all you're doing is making the material that much more desirable. There must be power in it if they don't want you to see it. I say, read it, repeat it, learn about it, and live to regret romanticizing ideas that did nothing but ruin lives. The man was a fraud. He was a poser, okay? He was everything that he believed, commanded, and committed was demonstrably evil. If you think that Israel's bombing is wrong, how could you ever see value in a message that was to kill as many innocent people as you can, not because of what they're doing to you, but because they don't believe what you do, and therefore they don't belong? That was his message. It wasn't revenge in some righteous idea of stopping oppression. It was existential. He was the ultimate anti-Semite. He was anti-everybody but his own. He never liberated a single society. He never helped a single population to get to a better place. His letter was to celebrate this. Make a video about how this is good. Because this is what he was gloating about. Here's his truth bomb. This is what you are romanticizing. He thanked God for this. Pleading for Palestine holds virtue. People should have a chance. Kids should know a life where they learn from listening to music before they listen to gunfire. Bombing has to stop. Stifling that society has to stop. But the letter is a window into the lesson of bin Laden that makes clear that the only way to ensure peace is to do the opposite. You do what he wanted, and there is more pain and worse pain. That's why anything but rejecting Hamas, a terrorist organization that dreams of being like bin Laden. They've made life nothing but worse in Gaza. Saying ceasefire feels so good. They won't honor it. They never have. They bombed during the pause. They said they agreed to the resolution to give back all hostages, but said only dozens. It is tantamount to dooming Palestine. After 9/11, bin Laden knew al-Qaeda would be hunted and would lose. He knew better than most. He was trained by America. He knew what she could do. So he and others They didn't stand up and fight the holy fight. They hid among innocents and hoped that the death and suffering around them while people were looking for them would boost their cause, even though they were causing that pain. Sound familiar? Should. Hamas is a poor man's Al-Qaeda, and Gaza is suffering, as we saw in Iraq, in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Yemen. Bin Laden told Muslims to take on the West, but you know what he did? He took flight. He hid for years, and when he was found, he didn't fight. He hid behind women and children and watched them die for his cowardice. This is his legacy. A man whose ideas nourished no one and nothing, left him barely fit to be fish food. And now, some in a new generation, desperate to see better in the world, are attracted to the ideas of a man who sounds like he wanted to empower the oppressed. But he did not. He wanted to oppress, and he wanted to kill anyone who believed differently. He was the problem, not the solution. For America, for Israel, for Islam. He put a pall on them. He put a stain on that faith that led leaders, even in this country, to say things as absurd as 1 billion people who believe in Islam hate us. Bin Laden birthed that fear that led to that kind of idea. Don't censor the letter. Don't censor the ideas. Expose them so that finally better ideas about how to get peace in that part of the world and really right back here have a chance. Because when you stack them up to what he wanted, the choice is obvious. Hey, thank you for watching. Please go to NewsNationNow.com, NewsNationNow.com, and you can find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button down below. Then you will get more of NewsNation's fact-driven coverage.